Isabella Cross signed what she thought was a job contract in a glass tower overlooking Manhattan, desperate enough not to read the fine print. 26, broke, and 2 weeks from eviction, she needed money fast. But the man who walked into that conference room wasn't her new boss. Roman Moretti, billionaire, crime lord, the kind of dangerous even other dangerous men feared, slid the signed papers across the table with tattooed fingers and said 5 words that stopped her heart. "Congratulations on our marriage." The room tilted. The contract wasn't for employment, it was a wedding certificate. And she'd already signed her name in ink that wouldn't wash away. Before we dive into Isabella's story, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. Image. The rain hammered New York like the city owed it money. Isabella Cross stood under the narrow awning of a bodega on East 47th Street, watching water pour off the edge in sheets while her phone buzzed with another overdue rent notification. 26 years old, bachelor's degree in linguistics collecting dust, bank account showing $47.23. Eviction notice taped to her apartment door with the kind of finality that made her stomach clench every time she thought about it. She pulled her jacket tighter even though it was already soaked through. The leather portfolio tucked under her arm, the one her mother gave her before cancer took her voice, then her life, was the only thing she'd managed to keep dry. Inside were copies of her resume, 3 reference letters, and a translation certification she'd earned while working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. The job posting had appeared on her screen at 2 in the morning when insomnia and panic were her only companions. Executive assistant/translator for a private investment firm. Salary negotiable. Immediate start. The address was in Midtown, the kind of building where people wore suits that cost more than her entire year's rent. She didn't let herself think about why a position that good was still open. Didn't let herself question why they'd called her in for an interview within an hour of her application. She just needed the job. Needed it so badly her hands shook when she finally pushed away from the bodega and started walking toward the address, rain soaking through her shoes with every step. Moretti Holdings occupied floors 30 through 45 of a glass and steel tower that looked like it could cut the sky open. The lobby was all black marble and recessed lighting, the kind of space designed to make you feel small. A security guard behind a curved desk looked up when she entered, water dripping from her jacket onto the polished floor. "Name," he said. Not a question, a command. "Isabella Cross." "I have an interview at 10. He checked something on his screen, then nodded toward the elevators. 40th floor, someone will meet you." The elevator was the kind of quiet that made her ears ring. She watched the numbers climb, 15, 23, 31. While trying to steady her breathing, her reflection in the polished doors showed exactly what she was. Exhausted, desperate, drowning. She pushed wet hair back from her face and straightened her shoulders. The doors opened to a reception area that looked like it belonged in a museum. Abstract art on the walls. Furniture that was probably older than she was. A woman behind the desk wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Cross?" "Yes." "Right this way." They walked down a hallway lined with windows overlooking Manhattan, the city spread out below like a glittering promise of everything Isabella couldn't afford. The woman, her nameplate said Victoria, moved with the kind of precision that came from years of knowing exactly where she stood in the hierarchy. "You'll be meeting with Mr. Chen first," Victoria said, opening a door to a conference room that was all glass walls and a table long enough to seat 20. "He handles initial screenings." Isabella barely had time to set down her portfolio before a man in his 50s entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. "Miss Cross." He didn't offer his hand. "I'm David Chen, Senior Counsel for Moretti Holdings. Please, sit." She sat. The chair was leather and too big, making her feel like a child called to the principal's office. Chen placed the tablet on the table and swiped through something she couldn't see. "Your application was quite impressive. Fluent in Italian, French, and Spanish. Legal translation experience. References from..." He paused, reading. "A judge and 2 attorneys. Unusual background for someone your age." "I worked throughout college," Isabella said, hating how her voice sounded small in this massive room. "And after, Translation work, paralegal positions, whatever I could find. Yet you're currently unemployed. The firm I worked for closed 6 months ago. Budget cuts. Chen nodded like he'd heard it before. Like everyone's tragedy was just data on a screen. He turned the tablet toward her. This is the contract. Standard employment agreement with Moretti Holdings. Your role would involve translation services, document preparation, and administrative support for our international operations. Isabella leaned forward, scanning the dense paragraphs of legal text. Her eyes caught on phrases like confidentiality and perpetuity, and exclusive service agreement, and binding arbitration for all disputes. It was aggressive, the kind of contract designed to protect the company at all costs. But the salary line made her breath catch. $200,000 a year, plus housing, plus benefits. She looked up. This salary, non-negotiable, Chen interrupted. The position requires absolute discretion and availability. You'd be working directly with the family on sensitive international matters. The compensation reflects that responsibility. Family. He'd said family, not company. Isabella's stomach twisted with the kind of unease that came from knowing something was wrong, but needing it too badly to ask questions. When would I start? Immediately. Today, if you sign now. I haven't even met Mr. Moretti is currently abroad. He trusts my judgment in these matters. If you're interested, I need your signature. Chen produced a pen from his jacket pocket and held it out. Isabella stared at it, at him, at the contract with its life-changing salary and aggressive legal language. Every instinct she had screamed that this was too easy, too fast, too good. But the eviction notice was real. The empty bank account was real. The stack of rejection emails sitting in her inbox was real. She took the pen. Her hand moved across the signature line before her brain could catch up. Muscle memory from years of signing legal documents taking over. Her name appeared in blue ink. Isabella M. Cross. The date. A second signature line at the bottom that she filled in automatically because that's what you did when lawyers put lines in front of you. Chen pulled the tablet back immediately, tapping something that made the screen flash. Excellent. Welcome to Moretti Holdings, Miss Cross. He stood, already moving toward the door, like the conversation was over. Wait. Isabella pushed back from the table, portfolio clutched against her chest. What happens now? Do I need to fill out tax forms, get an ID badge, meet the team? Chen paused at the door. Something crossed his face that might have been pity, or sympathy, or just exhaustion. Someone will be with you shortly to explain everything. Then he was gone, and Isabella was alone in the conference room with rain still hammering the windows and a growing sense that she'd just made a mistake she couldn't undo. She pulled out her phone to text her roommate, then remembered she didn't have a roommate anymore. Hadn't for 3 months, since Stephanie moved in with her boyfriend and left Isabella with a lease she couldn't afford. The apartment was probably already being shown to new tenants while her stuff sat in garbage bags by the door. The contract was still on the table. She pulled it closer, reading more carefully now. That's when she saw it. Not an employment agreement, a marriage contract. The words swam in front of her eyes. Binding union between Isabella Marie Cross and Roman Amadeo Moretti, executed on this date, witnessed and notarized. Her signature was at the bottom. Both signature lines, bride and witness. The room tilted. She shot to her feet, the chair scraping against marble, her breath coming too fast. This was insane. Illegal. A mistake. She'd signed an employment contract, not a... The conference room door opened. A man walked in wearing a black suit tailored so perfectly it looked like violence in fabric form. Tall, maybe 6'2". Dark hair cut short, olive skin. A jawline that could cut glass and eyes so pale gray they looked almost silver in the fluorescent light. But it was his hands that made Isabella's breath stop. Tattoos covered his right hand completely, creeping up under his shirt cuff in intricate black patterns she couldn't quite make out. Symbols, numbers, something that looked like a crowned skull on his knuckles. He closed the door behind him with a quiet click that sounded like a prison cell locking. You're Isabella. His voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that never had to raise itself to be heard. American accent with something underneath it. Italian, maybe. Old country cadence. Who are you? He moved to the head of the table, pulling out a chair and sitting like he owned not just the room, but the entire building beneath it. Probably because he did. Roman Moretti. The name landed like a physical blow. She'd heard it before. Everyone in New York had, if they paid attention to business news. Moretti Holdings. Real estate. Investments. Import-export. The kind of diversified portfolio that showed up in Forbes articles about young billionaires. But there was something else about that name. Something whispered in the back of her memory from when she'd worked at the law firm, from overheard conversations between attorneys who thought paralegals didn't listen. Moretti. The family that owned half the construction unions in the city. The name federal prosecutors couldn't quite pin down despite years of trying. The organization that made people nervous in rooms where powerful men gathered. Isabella's hands went numb. "You signed the contract," Roman said, gesturing toward the papers on the table. Not a question, a statement of fact. "I signed an employment agreement." "You signed a marriage certificate." "That's insane. That's not legally binding. I didn't." "New York State requires written consent, witness signatures, and proper filing. All three were satisfied the moment you signed." He leaned back, tattooed fingers steepled together. "Chen is a licensed officiant. The documents were filed electronically before you finished reading the first page." Isabella grabbed the edge of the table to keep from swaying. "This is fraud. It's a contract you signed of your own free will. I thought I was applying for a job, and now you have one." Roman's expression didn't change. No anger, no guilt, just cold efficiency. "You're my wife. That comes with certain responsibilities and benefits." "You can't just—" Her voice cracked. She pressed her palms flat against the table, trying to ground herself. "Why would you even do this? You're—" She gestured vaguely at him, at the room, at everything. "You could marry anyone, models, actresses, women who'd line up around the block." "I don't need someone who wants me. I need someone who needs something I can provide." His gray eyes locked onto hers. "You needed money, stability, a way out of whatever situation had you desperate enough to sign a contract without reading it properly. I needed a wife for legal purposes within my organization. We both got what we needed. I need a job, not a husband. You have both now." Isabella pushed away from the table, her chair hitting the window behind her. "I'm calling the police." "And tell them what?" Roman didn't move, didn't react. "That you signed a legal document you didn't read? That you accepted compensation for services rendered? Every signature is yours, Isabella. Every notarization is valid. You can fight this in court if you want. It'll take 2 years minimum and cost more money than you'll make in 5. Or He stood, and she understood immediately why people feared him. It wasn't size or anger. It was the absolute certainty in every movement that he would get what he wanted, one way or another. "You fulfill the terms of the contract. 1 year. You live in my home, attend necessary functions as my wife, and maintain the appearance of a legitimate marriage. At the end of 12 months, we file for a quiet divorce, and you walk away with enough money to start over anywhere you want. And if I refuse, then you walk out that door with nothing, back to your empty apartment with the eviction notice, back to rejection emails and sleeping on friends' couches, back to deciding which bills to ignore while you eat ramen for dinner and try to convince yourself tomorrow will be different." Every word was a knife pressed exactly where it would hurt most, because he was right. She had nothing, was nothing, invisible to every company that glanced at her resume and saw another desperate graduate with no connections and no safety net. This man, this criminal, because that's what he was, she could see it in the way he talked about contracts and organizations and legal purposes, was offering her survival, at the cost of her freedom. Isabella's hands shook. "What happens if I sign and then walk away? Break the contract?" "I wouldn't advise it." "That's not an answer." Roman moved around the table until he was close enough that she could see the flecks of darker gray in his eyes, the small scar above his right eyebrow, the absolute absence of mercy in his expression. "I built this empire by ensuring people honor their commitments. You signed a contract. That makes you mine for the next 12 months, whether you like it or not. If you run, I will find you. If you talk to reporters, lawyers, police, I will destroy whatever life you try to build. You wanted stability, Isabella? Here it is. 12 months of your life in exchange for a future that doesn't involve sleeping in your car." She wanted to hit him, wanted to scream. Wanted to sprint out of this glass tower and keep running until she hit ocean, but her bank account had $47.23 and nowhere to live. So instead, she lifted her chin and met his eyes. What do I have to do? Something flickered across Roman's face that might have been approval, or satisfaction, or just relief that she was smart enough to recognize reality. Come with me. He headed for the door without waiting to see if she'd follow. Isabella grabbed her portfolio and moved on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Her reflection in the glass walls looked like a stranger. Wet hair, pale face, eyes too big with shock. This morning she'd been unemployed. Now she was married to a man who spoke about controlling people's lives the way other people talked about the weather. The elevator ride down felt longer than the one up. Roman stood perfectly still, hands in his pockets, watching the numbers descend. Isabella pressed herself into the opposite corner, her mind racing through escape plans and legal strategies in absolute panic. 1 year, she said quietly. 12 months. And then I'm free. Completely. The lobby was still pristine marble and uncomfortable silence. The security guard nodded as they passed, and Isabella realized he'd known. Everyone in this building knew. This wasn't Roman's first time walking someone through a signed contract they didn't understand. Outside, the rain had slowed to a cold drizzle. A black Mercedes idled at the curb, driver already standing beside the open rear door. Get in, Roman said. Isabella looked at the car. At him. At the street where taxis splashed through puddles and people rushed past without looking at her. She could run, right now. Just take off down the sidewalk and disappear into the city. But she'd still be broke, still be homeless, still be invisible. She got in the car. Roman slid in beside her, and the door closed with the soft, expensive sound of German engineering. The leather seats were heated. The interior smelled like sandalwood and money. Where are we going? She asked. Home. The words settled over her like a prison sentence. They drove in silence through Manhattan streets slick with rain, heading north toward the Upper East Side. Isabella watched the city pass outside her window. Coffee shops and dry cleaners and boutiques that sold handbags worth more than her education. The car turned onto a tree-lined street that screamed old money. Townhouses with wrought iron gates, doormen in uniforms. The kind of neighborhood where people didn't talk to their neighbors because everyone was too wealthy to need anything from anyone. They pulled up to a limestone mansion that looked like it had been airlifted from a European postcard. 4 stories. Arched windows. A front door that was probably older than Isabella's entire family tree. This is where you live? She asked. Where we live, Roman corrected. As of today. The driver opened her door. Isabella stepped out onto the sidewalk, portfolio still clutched against her chest like a shield, and stared up at the building that was apparently now her home. A man in a dark suit stood by the entrance. Not a doorman. Security. She could tell by the way he carried himself, by the slight bulge under his jacket that suggested a holster. This is Marcus, Roman said. Head of my security detail. If you leave the house, he or one of his team goes with you. I'm a prisoner? You're my wife. The distinction matters in my world. Isabella wanted to argue, but Marcus was already opening the front door, and Roman was moving inside with the expectation that she'd follow. The interior was exactly what she expected. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that probably belonged in museums. But it was the silence that struck her most. The kind of heavy, suffocating quiet that came from spaces where nobody laughed or played music or lived like normal people. Maria will show you to your room, Roman said, gesturing to an older woman in a gray dress who appeared from somewhere deeper in the house. She manages the household. If you need anything, ask her. My room? Isabella repeated. Not our room. I'm not a monster, Isabella. You'll have your own space, privacy. The master suite is on the 3rd floor. Yours is on the 2nd. There's a wardrobe already stocked with clothes in your size. Chen was very thorough. Of course he was. They'd planned this. Every detail mapped out while she'd been sitting in her apartment worrying about rent. Maria smiled at her with the kind of professional warmth that suggested she'd seen this before. This way, miss. Roman was already walking toward a hallway that probably led to his office or study or wherever men like him went to count their money and ruin people's lives. Roman, Isabella called after him. He stopped, turned. Why me? She asked. You said you needed someone who needed something, but there are thousands of desperate people in this city. Why pick me? For the first time since they'd met, his expression shifted into something almost human, almost sad. Because you reminded me of someone, he said quietly. Someone I couldn't save. Then he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Isabella standing in the foyer of her prison, wearing wet shoes and holding a portfolio full of dreams that no longer mattered. Maria touched her elbow gently. Come, miss. Let's get you settled. Isabella followed her up a curved staircase with a banister that felt like silk under her hand. The second floor was all closed doors and thick carpets that absorbed sound. Maria opened the third door on the right, revealing a bedroom that was bigger than Isabella's entire former apartment. King-size bed with white linens, sitting area by bay windows overlooking the street, bathroom visible through an open door that showed marble and gold fixtures, a walk-in closet where clothes hung in neat rows organized by color and style. Mr. Moretti said you'd need time to adjust, Maria said. Dinner's at 7 in the formal dining room, but if you prefer to eat in your room tonight, I can arrange it. Maria, Isabella set down her portfolio on the dresser. How long have you worked here? 15 years. And how many other women has he brought here before me? Maria's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes softened. You're the first wife, miss, but not the first woman. Mr. Moretti is complicated, but he's not cruel. If you follow the contract terms, he'll honor his end, 1 year, then you'll have your freedom. It wasn't comfort, but it was something. Thank you, Isabella said, because what else could she say? Maria nodded and left, closing the door behind her with another of those soft, expensive clicks. Isabella walked to the window and looked down at the street below. People walking dogs. A woman pushing a stroller. Normal lives happening while hers had just been bought and sold like property. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and let herself feel the full weight of what had happened. This morning she'd been desperate. Now she was married. To a man who spoke about controlling people with the casual authority of someone who'd been doing it his entire life. 1 year, 12 months. She could survive that. Had to survive it. Because the alternative was going back to nothing, and Isabella Cross had spent enough years drowning in nothing to know she'd do anything, even sign her name to a contract she didn't read, to stay above water. Even if it meant shackling herself to a man whose last name made people lower their voices when they spoke it. Outside, the rain started again, washing over the city in waves that sounded like static against the window. Isabella stood there watching it fall until her legs ached and her reflection in the glass looked like a ghost. Somewhere downstairs, a door opened and closed. Footsteps in the hallway. The house settling into its evening rhythm. And Isabella realized with a clarity that made her stomach turn that she'd just trapped herself in a cage built from marble and money and contracts written in language designed to make sure she could never claw her way out. The door opened behind her. Roman stood in the doorway, his suit jacket gone, sleeves rolled up to reveal more tattoos creeping up his forearms. Dark ink against olive skin, symbols she didn't recognize. I forgot to mention, he said, his voice filling the room even though he didn't raise it. Tomorrow morning, you'll meet my grandfather. He's the reason you're here. I thought you needed a wife for legal purposes. I do. He won't sign over full control of the family operations until I prove I can build something stable. A marriage. A legitimate partnership. Something that looks like I'm capable of more than violence and profit margins. Isabella turned from the window to face him. So I'm here to convince an old man you're capable of love? You're here to convince him I'm capable of commitment. Love has nothing to do with it. And when he finds out this is fake, Roman's expression hardened. He won't. Because you'll play your part perfectly, or the consequences will be worse than eviction. Do we understand each other? Every word was a threat wrapped in silk. Crystal clear, Isabella said, hating how steady her voice sounded when her hands were shaking. Roman nodded once. Good. Dinner's in 20 minutes. Wear something appropriate. He left without waiting for a response, and Isabella stood in the center of her beautiful prison, wondering how many women before her had stood in this exact spot, wearing this exact expression, realizing they'd sold themselves for survival and now had to live with the cost. She walked to the closet and found a simple black dress that probably cost more than her entire former wardrobe. It fit perfectly because, of course it did. Chen had been thorough. Downstairs, she could hear movement, voices, the clink of dishes being prepared. Isabella looked at herself in the full-length mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. Designer dress, expensive bedroom, a ring on her left hand that she didn't remember putting on, but that sat there anyway, gold and heavy and binding. Mrs. Isabella Moretti. The name felt like someone else's life, but it was hers now. For the next 12 months, it was all she had. She took a breath, straightened her spine, walked out of her room and down the stairs toward whatever dinner and grandfather and future awaited her in the dining room, where her new husband sat at the head of the table like a king, holding court over an empire built on secrets she was only beginning to understand. The dining room doors were open. Roman sat with his back to her, phone pressed to his ear, speaking rapid Italian in a voice that could have stripped paint. He hung up as she entered, looked at her in the black dress with an expression she couldn't read. "You clean up well," he said. "You bought the dress. I bought everything, including you." The words hung in the air between them like smoke, filling the space with truths neither of them wanted to acknowledge. Isabella sat down across from him at the long table, a distance that felt safer than sitting beside him. "How long do we have to keep this up? This dinner, this conversation, this—" She gestured between them. "Whatever this is?" "Until my grandfather is satisfied." "And when will that be?" Roman leaned back, gray eyes reflecting the chandelier light overhead. "When he stops looking for reasons to take everything away from me." For just a moment, Isabella saw something under the cold exterior, something wounded and desperate that reminded her why he'd said she reminded him of someone he couldn't save. Then it was gone, replaced by the mask he wore like armor. "Eat," he said as Maria appeared with plates of food Isabella didn't have the appetite to touch. "You'll need your strength tomorrow. My grandfather doesn't tolerate weakness." "Neither do you, apparently." Roman's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "No, Mrs. Moretti, I don't." And as Isabella sat across from this man who'd purchased her signature and her life with the same casual efficiency people used to buy groceries, she realized the most terrifying part wasn't that she hated him. It was that she understood him, understood the desperate calculation that made you do terrible things to survive. Because she'd just done the same thing he had. Signed a contract, made a deal, sold something precious for something necessary. They were the same kind of drowning. And whether she liked it or not, they were going to sink or swim together for the next 12 months. Outside, thunder rumbled across Manhattan like the city was laughing at them both. Isabella didn't sleep. She lay in the king-size bed staring at the ceiling while the house creaked and settled around her, every sound amplified by silence and fear. Around 3 in the morning, she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her door. They paused. She held her breath, waiting for the handle to turn. But the footsteps moved on, and she was left alone with her racing heart and the knowledge that Roman Moretti was awake somewhere in this mansion, probably working or planning or doing whatever it was that men like him did when the rest of the world was sleeping. By the time gray light filtered through the curtains, Isabella had given up on rest entirely. She showered in the marble bathroom, letting hot water pound against her shoulders while she tried to wash away the reality of what she'd signed. The clothes in the closet fit perfectly because someone had studied her measurements, her style, her entire existence before she'd even walked into that building yesterday. She chose a navy dress with long sleeves, conservative, the kind of thing you wore to meet someone's family when you needed to make a good impression. Downstairs, Maria was already moving through the kitchen with quiet efficiency. Coffee brewing, eggs being whisked in a copper bowl. The smell was almost enough to make Isabella's stomach unclench. "Good morning, miss," Maria said without looking up. "Mr. Moretti is in his study. He asked that you join him at 7:30. Isabella checked her phone. 7:18. "What's his grandfather like?" she asked, pouring herself coffee from the pot that probably cost more than her former rent. Maria's hands paused over the eggs. "Mr. Vittorio is traditional. He built the family from nothing, came to America with nothing but debts and determination, and turned it into what you see now. He expects respect, loyalty, and he can smell a lie from across a room. So I'm screwed. You're married to his grandson. That gives you protection, but also puts you under a microscope." Maria turned to face her fully. "My advice? Don't try to act like you belong. Just be honest about what you are, someone new to this life, trying to find your footing. Vittorio respects honesty more than performance. Even if the entire marriage is a performance. Maria's expression softened, especially then, because if you're performing, at least do it well enough that he can pretend to believe it. Isabella drank her coffee. It was perfect. Strong enough to steady her hands, but smooth enough not to burn going down. At 7:30 exactly, she knocked on the study door. "Come in." Roman sat behind a desk that looked like it had witnessed decades of decisions that ruined lives and built fortunes. He was already dressed in another perfectly tailored suit, charcoal gray this time, and he looked like he'd actually slept, which seemed impossible given the footsteps she'd heard at 3 a.m. "Sit," he said, gesturing to one of the leather chairs across from him. Isabella sat. The chair was positioned slightly lower than his, a subtle power move that probably worked on most people. "My grandfather arrives at 9, Roman said, setting down the pen he'd been holding. "He'll stay for breakfast. Ask questions. Observe how we interact. Your job is simple. Be my wife. Not a good wife. Not a perfect wife. Just someone who's married to me and trying to figure out what that means. That shouldn't be hard since I have no idea what that means. Good. Use that." Roman leaned back, studying her with those pale gray eyes that seemed to see through skin and bone. "He'll ask how we met. Tell him the truth. You came to interview for a position, I offered you something more substantial, and you accepted. He doesn't need to know the contract details." "You mean the fact that I signed my life away without reading the fine print?" "I mean the fact that you made a choice. Own it. Vittorio respects people who stand behind their decisions, even bad ones." Isabella's fingers tightened around the arms of the chair. "What if he asks if I love you? Tell him you're still figuring that out." "And if he doesn't believe me?" Roman stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Then we have a problem. Because if Vittorio thinks this marriage is a sham designed to manipulate him into signing over control, he'll burn everything I've built just to teach me a lesson about lies. So my job is to convince a man who built a criminal empire that his grandson, who bought himself a wife, is suddenly capable of genuine human connection. Your job is to survive breakfast without making me look like a fool." The words landed like a slap. Isabella stood, closing the distance between them until she was close enough to smell his cologne, something expensive and sharp that matched the edge in his voice. "I signed your contract," she said quietly. "I'll play your game. But don't mistake my desperation for stupidity. I know exactly what you are, Roman, and if you think I'm going to grovel just because you rescued me from poverty, you picked the wrong woman." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or respect. Or just recalculation. "Good," he said. "He'll eat you alive if you show weakness. Show him spine instead." "I have plenty of spine, I just haven't had much use for it lately." Roman's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if he remembered how. "Wear it today. You'll need it." He brushed past her, heading for the door, but Isabella caught his arm. The tattoos under her fingers were warm, almost alive against her palm. "One question," she said. "Make it quick." "Who did I remind you of? Yesterday, you said I reminded you of someone you couldn't save." Roman looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then his expression shifted into something raw and unguarded. "My sister," he said quietly. "Elena. She was 22 when she signed a contract she didn't understand with people who promised her security. They delivered chains instead. By the time I found her, it was too late to save anything but her body." Isabella's hand fell away. "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She made her choice, just like you made yours." He pulled his arm back, the moment of vulnerability already closing like a wound. "The difference is, I'm keeping you alive long enough to regret it." He left before she could respond, and Isabella stood alone in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the lingering scent of expensive cologne, trying to reconcile the man who bought women with contracts with the brother who'd failed to save his sister from the same fate. 9 o'clock arrived with the sound of a car door closing outside and footsteps on the front stairs that made the whole house feel like it was holding its breath. Isabella stood beside Roman in the foyer while Maria opened the door to reveal a man who looked like time and violence had carved him from granite. Vittorio Moretti was maybe 70 but moved like someone 20 years younger. Silver hair swept back from a face that might have been handsome once, before scars and hard-living etched lines deep enough to hold shadows. He wore a black suit that probably cost more than Isabella's education, and his eyes, the same pale gray as Roman's, swept over her with the kind of assessment that made her feel like livestock at auction. "Nonno," Roman said, stepping forward to embrace the old man with genuine warmth that Isabella hadn't seen him capable of until now. They spoke in rapid Italian, too fast for Isabella to follow beyond basic greetings. Then Vittorio turned his full attention to her, and she understood immediately why Roman had warned her. This man could smell lies. "So," Vittorio said in English accented with decades of Italian underneath, "you are the woman who finally caught my grandson." "Isabella Cross," she said, extending her hand. "Though I suppose it's Moretti now." Vittorio took her hand, but instead of shaking it, he turned it over to examine her ring finger where gold sat heavy and binding. He chose well, simple, classic, not showy. "I didn't really have input on the ring." Vittorio's eyes snapped to hers, sharp, calculating. "Honest," he said. "I like that. Roman, your wife speaks her mind. This is either going to be very entertaining or very expensive for you." "I'm counting on expensive," Roman said, his hand settling on Isabella's lower back in a gesture that looked casual but felt like a warning. "Shall we have breakfast?" The dining room had been transformed from last night's tense dinner into something approaching warmth. Fresh flowers on the table, light streaming through windows. Maria moving between the kitchen and table with plates of food that smelled like comfort and home. Vittorio sat at the head of the table, Roman's usual spot, forcing Roman and Isabella to sit beside each other on one side. Close enough that their shoulders touched. Close enough that Isabella could feel tension radiating off Roman like heat. "Tell me," Vittorio said, cutting into his eggs with surgical precision, "how did you meet my grandson?" Isabella swallowed her coffee, buying time. "I interviewed for a position with the company. Roman made me a different offer." "What kind of position?" "Translation services. I speak Italian, French, and Spanish fluently. I thought I'd be working on international contracts. And instead? Instead, I married the man signing them." Vittorio's laugh was sharp and genuine. "She has fire, Roman. Where did you find her?" "She found me," Roman said, his hand sliding from Isabella's back to her thigh under the table. A possessive gesture that made her breath catch. "Walked into my building soaking wet and desperate enough to sign whatever I put in front of her." The honesty was brutal. But Vittorio nodded like it made sense. "Desperation," the old man said, "is the foundation of every great partnership. Your grandmother, may she rest, was desperate when I met her. Desperate to leave Sicily. Desperate for a life that wasn't poverty and violence. I gave her America. She gave me sons. It worked because we both knew what we were trading." Isabella felt Roman's hand tighten on her thigh. A warning, or maybe agreement. "What are you trading, Isabella?" Vittorio asked, his gray eyes pinning her to her chair. "Stability," she said. "Security. A year of my life in exchange for a future that doesn't involve sleeping in my car." "And what is Roman trading?" That was the question, wasn't it? What did a man who had everything trade for a wife he didn't want? "Legitimacy," Isabella said, meeting Vittorio's gaze. "The appearance of stability. Proof to the world that he's more than just profit margins and cold business decisions." Vittorio set down his fork. "You think my grandson is cold? I think he's calculated, which is probably why he survived this long in your world." The silence that followed was so heavy, Isabella could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. She'd gone too far, said too much, revealed that she understood exactly what the Moretti family was beneath the real estate holdings and investment portfolios. Then Vittorio smiled. It transformed his entire face from granite to something almost human. "I like her," he said to Roman. "She sees you. Not many people do." Roman's hand relaxed on Isabella's thigh. "She's sharp. I'll give her that." "Sharp keeps you alive." Vittorio turned back to his eggs like the entire conversation had been a test Isabella had somehow passed. "Tell me, Isabella, What do you think of my grandson's tattoos? The question caught her off guard. I haven't really. Lies, Vittorio interrupted. Women always notice tattoos, especially ones as extensive as Roman's. Isabella glanced at Roman, who was watching her with an expression that dared her to tell the truth. I think they're a language, she said carefully. Symbols and numbers that mean something to people who know how to read them. I think they tell a story Roman doesn't want to explain. They tell several stories, Vittorio said, each one written in ink and blood. The crowned skull on his right hand, that marks him as head of the family, the numbers running up his forearm, every successful negotiation that ended in our favor, the roses around his wrist, for every person he's lost. Isabella's eyes found Roman's arm where ink disappeared under his sleeve. How many roses? How many people? He carries death with him, Vittorio continued, as a reminder, as a warning, as a promise that he remembers every debt, every betrayal, every loss. That is the man you married, Isabella, a living ledger of violence and loyalty. No, Roman started, but Vittorio waved him off. She should know what she's tied herself to. You think you did her a favor, Roman? Gave her stability and security? You chained her to a sinking ship. This family, this empire, it's held together with duct tape and threats. One wrong move, one federal investigation that actually sticks, one rival who gets lucky, and it all comes down. She deserves to know that before she decides whether to stay or run. She's not running, Roman said, his voice hard. We have a contract. Contracts can be broken. Not this one. Vittorio's eyes shifted between them, reading something in the tension that Isabella couldn't name. We'll see, the old man said quietly. Time reveals everything. Lies, loyalty, love. Give it 6 months, Roman. If she's still here, still standing beside you, still looking at you like you might be human, then maybe you've earned what I built. But if this is just another calculated move, another negotiation designed to manipulate me into signing over control, it's not. Then prove it. Vittorio stood, breakfast barely touched, and Roman rose immediately. Isabella followed a beat too late, her legs shaky from adrenaline and the weight of everything Vittorio had just laid bare. The old man moved toward the door, then paused to look back at Isabella. My grandson is good at many things, he said. Running businesses, making money, eliminating problems. But he's terrible at being human. That's where you come in, yes? You make him remember he's more than just ink and violence. I don't think I can make him anything he doesn't want to be, Isabella said. Vittorio's smile was sad. Then you're already smarter than most of the women who've tried. He left with Maria showing him out, and suddenly the dining room felt too big and too empty. Isabella sank back into her chair, her hands shaking so badly she had to press them flat against the table. You did well, Roman said, still standing. I told your grandfather I married you for money and stability. You told him the truth. That's what he wanted. He called you a sinking ship. He's not wrong. Isabella looked up at him, at this man who'd bought her with a contract and a signature, and saw exhaustion in the set of his shoulders that matched her own. What happens now? She asked. Now you live here. Attend functions. Play the role. Convince the world you're actually my wife. And convince your grandfather I'm not just another negotiation? If you can. Isabella pushed back from the table, suddenly desperate for air. I need to go out, walk, something. Marcus will go with you. I don't need a babysitter. You don't get a choice. Roman's voice was final. You're a Moretti now. That makes you a target for every rival, every federal agent, every journalist looking for a story. Marcus goes with you, or you stay inside. Those are your options. Some stability, Isabella muttered, heading for the door. Isabella. She stopped, but didn't turn around. Thank you, Roman said quietly. For breakfast. For not running. For standing there and taking everything my grandfather threw at you without flinching. I flinched plenty on the inside. He didn't see it. That's what matters. Isabella left without responding, climbing the stairs to her room, where she could lock the door and pretend for 5 minutes that she was still a person with choices instead of a woman who'd signed them all away for survival. The rest of the day passed in a blur of reality settling in. Marcus drove her to her old apartment where she packed the few possessions worth keeping, books, photos, her mother's jewelry box, while her former landlord watched with crossed arms and an expression that said, good riddance. The eviction notice was still taped to the door. Isabella peeled it off and stuffed it in her pocket like evidence of who she used to be. Back at the mansion, Maria helped her unpack in the walk-in closet that had more square footage than her entire former living space. Designer clothes hung in organized rows, shoes lined up like soldiers, everything perfect and empty and sterile. "You'll get used to it," Maria said, folding Isabella's old t-shirts with the same care she'd give Cashmere. "I don't want to get used to it." "Then you'll be miserable for a year. Your choice." That night, Isabella ate dinner alone in her room while Roman was somewhere else in the house, probably working or planning or doing whatever it was that kept him up until 3 a.m. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling again, listening to the house creak, wondering how many other women had lain in expensive beds feeling trapped by gold and silk. Around midnight, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer. Then curiosity got the better of her. "Hello? Mrs. Moretti." The voice was male, smooth, with an accent she couldn't place. "Congratulations on your marriage. I'm sure you're very happy." Isabella sat up, her heart pounding. "Who is this?" "Someone who knows exactly how your marriage happened. The contract, the signatures, the desperation, all of it." "What do you want?" "Just to remind you that Roman Moretti's empire is built on sand. And when it falls, and it will fall, you'll go down with him unless you're smart enough to save yourself." "I'm hanging up." "Wait," the voice sharpened. "I can offer you something better than a year in a gilded cage. Real protection, real freedom. All you have to do is tell me what Roman is planning. His business deals, his connections, his vulnerabilities." Isabella's hand tightened around the phone. "You want me to spy on him?" "I want you to survive what's coming, because Roman has enemies you don't even know about. And they're coming for him, soon." The line went dead. Isabella stared at her phone, her hands shaking. Someone knew about the contract. Someone was watching. Someone wanted information. She should tell Roman, should walk down the hallway right now and show him the call log and let him handle whatever threat was circling. But a small, bitter part of her wondered if maybe the voice on the phone was right. Maybe Roman's empire was collapsing. Maybe she'd chained herself to a man who was about to drag her down into whatever hell was waiting. She didn't sleep at all that night. Morning came with cold sunlight and Maria knocking on her door with coffee and the news that Roman wanted to see her in his study immediately. Isabella dressed in jeans and a sweater, the first time she'd worn anything remotely casual since arriving, and headed downstairs with her phone burning a hole in her pocket. Roman was on the phone when she entered, speaking in clipped Italian that sounded like orders. He hung up when he saw her. "We have a problem," he said without preamble. "What kind of problem?" "Someone leaked information about our marriage to several news outlets. Not the contract details, but enough to make it interesting. Billionaire Mafia heir marries unknown woman in whirlwind romance. That kind of garbage." Isabella's stomach dropped. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that we need to do damage control. There's a charity gala tomorrow night. High society, press coverage. We're going together as newlyweds. I don't have anything to wear to a gala. You will by this afternoon. Maria's already arranged for stylists and a dress fitting. You'll be ready." "Roman, this isn't optional, Isabella. We need to sell this marriage to the world, starting now. Which means you smile. You stay close to me. You act like you're exactly where you want to be." "And if I can't?" Roman moved around his desk until he was close enough that she could see the dark circles under his eyes that makeup didn't quite hide. "Then we both lose everything." The words hung between them, heavy with shared desperation. Isabella thought about the phone call, the voice offering her a way out. She should tell him, but the words stuck in her throat because telling him meant admitting she'd even considered the offer, meant revealing that part of her was already looking for exits from a cage she'd only been locked in for 3 days. "I'll be ready," she said instead. "Good." Roman's hand came up to cup her jaw, thumb brushing her cheekbone in a gesture that looked tender but felt like possession. "Tomorrow night, you're mine, completely. No hesitation, no fear, just a woman standing beside her husband. Can you do that?" Isabella met his gray eyes and saw her own reflection looking back, trapped, desperate, clinging to survival. "Yes," she whispered. Roman's thumb traced her lower lip once before he stepped back. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be exhausting." Isabella left his study and climbed the stairs back to her room, her phone still burning in her pocket with the unknown number that had offered her freedom at the cost of betrayal. She sat on her bed and stared at it. One call. That's all it would take to blow up Roman's empire and maybe save herself from going down with it. But the memory of his hand on her jaw, the exhaustion in his eyes, the way he'd said thank you after breakfast with his grandfather, those things made her hesitate. Because maybe she was already more trapped than she realized, not by the contract, but by the growing, terrifying realization that she understood Roman Moretti better than she'd ever wanted to, understood what it was like to be desperate enough to do terrible things, understood what it felt like to be drowning and clinging to anything that kept you above water, even if it was sinking too. The phone buzzed again. Same unknown number. Think about my offer, Mrs. Moretti. Clock's ticking. Isabella deleted the message and turned off her phone. Tomorrow she'd stand beside Roman at a gala and smile for cameras and pretend to be exactly what everyone expected. A woman who'd married for love instead of survival. And after that, she'd figure out whether she was strong enough to survive the fall when Roman's empire finally collapsed, or whether she'd drown with him, chained by signatures and desperation and the slowly growing understanding that maybe they deserved each other after all. The afternoon passed in a blur of stylists and dress fittings and Maria murmuring encouragement while Isabella stood on a platform being pinned into a gown that cost more than most people's cars. Midnight blue silk, off the shoulder, elegant enough for society pages and dangerous enough to make people remember her name. "You look beautiful, miss," Maria said, adjusting the hem. "I look expensive," Isabella corrected. "There's a difference." "In this world? No, there's not." That night, Isabella lay awake again, but this time her mind wasn't racing through escape plans. Instead, she kept circling back to the same question. What happened to Elena? Roman's sister, the one who signed a contract she didn't understand, the one he couldn't save. Isabella pulled out her phone, turned it back on despite her better judgment, and searched the name. Elena Moretti, 22, died 6 years ago. The articles were vague. Suspected overdose. No foul play suspected. Tragic loss for the prominent Moretti family. But between the lines, Isabella could read what the press couldn't or wouldn't say. Elena had been found in a warehouse owned by a rival family. Her body showed signs of long-term captivity. The official story was overdose. The truth was probably much worse. And Roman had found her too late. Isabella closed the browser, her chest tight. She understood now why he'd looked at her in that conference room and seen someone worth saving. Why he'd built this entire charade around a marriage contract. Not because he needed legitimacy, because he was trying to save his sister a second time by saving someone who reminded him of her. Which meant Isabella wasn't just a wife bought with a contract. She was a ghost. A second chance. A way for Roman to rewrite history by keeping her alive long enough to honor his sister's memory. The realization should have made her angry. Should have felt like manipulation. Instead, it just felt sad. Two people drowning, one trying to save the other while sinking himself. Tomorrow, she'd put on the midnight blue gown and stand beside him at a gala and play the role of a woman who'd married for love. But tonight, alone in her expensive bedroom with a phone full of threatening messages and articles about dead girls who'd signed contracts they didn't understand, Isabella Cross, Mrs. Isabella Moretti, finally understood what Maria had meant. You'll get used to it. Not the mansion or the clothes or the security detail, but the weight. The constant pressure of being watched, measured, judged. The knowledge that every move mattered because one wrong step could bring down an empire. The slow suffocation of becoming someone else's second chance at redemption. She was getting used to it, and that scared her more than anything. Because if she got used to it, she'd forget how to want more. Forget what freedom felt like. Forget that she'd once been Isabella Cross who walked through rain and signed her name in desperation. Tomorrow, she'd be Mrs. Moretti at a gala full of people who'd never known hunger or fear or the particular desperation that made you sell yourself for stability. And she'd smile. Because that's what the contract said. That's what survival required. That's what Roman needed from her to prove to his dying grandfather that he was capable of something more than ink and violence. Outside her window, the city lights blazed like a reminder that millions of people were out there, living normal lives while she was trapped in a marble cage, wearing designer clothes and carrying a phone full of threats from people who wanted to use her to destroy the man she'd accidentally married. Isabella turned off the phone again, closed her eyes, and waited for morning to arrive with its gala and its cameras and its performance that would determine whether she and Roman sank or swam through the next 12 months of their mutually beneficial drowning. Somewhere in the house, footsteps passed by her door, paused, moved on. Roman, awake at 3 a.m. again, probably thinking about his sister or his grandfather, or the empire he'd built on sand that was already starting to shift beneath his feet. And Isabella lay there wondering if maybe, just maybe, they were both too far gone to save. But come morning, she'd put on the gown anyway, stand beside him anyway, smile for the cameras anyway. Because that's what drowning people did. They clung to anything that floated, even if it was sinking too. The gala was everything Isabella expected, and nothing she was prepared for. The venue was a restored mansion in the Hamptons that looked like it had been carved from marble and gold leaf, every surface polished until it reflected the kind of wealth that made normal people feel like they were trespassing just by breathing the same air. Chandeliers the size of small cars hung from ceilings painted with scenes of mythological excess. Women dripped diamonds. Men wore watches that cost more than houses. And everyone moved through the space with the casual entitlement of people who'd never known what it felt like to worry about money. Isabella stood beside Roman in her midnight blue gown, his hand resting possessively on her lower back, and tried not to feel like an imposter dressed in borrowed clothes at someone else's party. "Smile," Roman murmured against her ear, his breath warm. "You look like you're attending a funeral." "Maybe I am," she muttered back. His fingers pressed harder against her spine. A warning. "Cameras at 3 o'clock. Look at me like you love me." Isabella turned her face toward his, forcing her expression into something that might pass for adoration if you didn't look too closely. Roman's gray eyes held hers with an intensity that felt almost real, his free hand coming up to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that would photograph beautifully. "Better," he said. "Now, let's get this over with." They moved through the crowd like royalty, Roman introducing her to business associates and politicians and people whose names she'd only ever seen in headlines. Everyone smiled. Everyone congratulated them. And everyone watched with the kind of sharp attention that came from people who made their living reading weakness and exploiting it. A woman in a crimson dress materialized beside them, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Roman Moretti, I heard rumors you'd finally settled down. I had to see it to believe it." "Vanessa," Roman said, his tone carefully neutral. "Isabella, this is Vanessa Chen. We've done business together." The woman's eyes swept over Isabella like she was livestock. "How charming. Where did he find you, darling?" "A job interview," Isabella said before Roman could sanitize the truth. "I walked into his building looking for work. He offered me something more permanent." Vanessa's laugh was musical and cruel. "How very Roman, always turning transactions into something that resembles human connection." She leaned closer, her perfume expensive and cloying. "Tell me, Mrs. Moretti, what's it like being married to a man everyone fears?" "Probably similar to doing business with him," Isabella said. "You never quite know if he's going to shake your hand or break it." Roman's fingers tightened on her back, but Vanessa laughed again, genuine this time. "I like her," she said to Roman. "She has teeth. Most of the women you've brought to these things were all polish and no spine. This one might actually survive you." She drifted away before Isabella could decide if that was a compliment or a threat. "You're supposed to be charming," Roman said, guiding her toward the bar. "Not antagonizing my business associates." "You wanted me to act like myself. That's myself." "Your job is to make me look stable, not reckless." "Maybe you shouldn't have married someone desperate enough to sign a contract without reading it if you wanted stability." Roman's jaw tightened. He ordered 2 drinks, scotch for himself, champagne for her, and handed her the glass with enough force that some liquid sloshed over the rim. "You're angry," he said. It wasn't a question. "I'm performing. Isn't that what you wanted?" "I wanted—" His phone buzzed. He pulled it from his pocket, glanced at the screen, and his entire expression shifted into something cold and dangerous. "Stay here," he said. "Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'll be back in 5 minutes." He disappeared into the crowd before Isabella could argue, leaving her standing alone by the bar in a room full of predators who could smell vulnerability. She lasted maybe 30 seconds before a man in his 50s approached, his smile too wide and his eyes too focused on the neckline of her dress. "You must be the new Mrs. Moretti," he said. "Lawrence Abbott. I own several properties in Manhattan that Roman's been trying to acquire." "Nice to meet you," Isabella said, already scanning the room for Roman. "Tell me," Lawrence continued, moving closer. "Is it true you two met only a week ago? That's quite the whirlwind romance. Love works fast sometimes. Or desperation does." His smile sharpened. "I did some research on you, Isabella Cross. Recent graduate, unemployed, 2 weeks from homelessness before you walked into Roman's building. That's quite the Cinderella story." Isabella's hands tightened around her champagne glass. "I don't know what you're implying." "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. You needed money. Roman needed a wife for appearances. You both got what you wanted. It's very transactional, very Roman. If you have a point, make it." Lawrence leaned in close enough that she could smell the whiskey on his breath. "My point is that Roman Moretti's empire is collapsing. Federal investigations, rival families moving in, his grandfather refusing to hand over full control. And you," he gestured at her with his drink, "are his last desperate attempt to look legitimate, a pretty face to distract from the rot underneath." "You're drunk. I'm informed." Lawrence's expression shifted into something almost pitying. "When this all falls apart, and it will, make sure you're smart enough to save yourself. Roman won't. He'll drag you down with him because that's what men like him do. They destroy everything they touch." He walked away, and Isabella stood frozen by the bar with champagne she couldn't taste and a growing sense that the ground beneath her feet was already cracking. Roman reappeared moments later, his face a mask of control that didn't quite hide the fury underneath. "We're leaving," he said, taking her elbow. "What happened?" "Not here." He guided her through the crowd toward the exit, his grip on her arm just shy of painful. People stared, whispered. Isabella caught fragments of conversation as they passed. Heard the feds raided one of his warehouses. Grandfather still hasn't signed over control. Marriage is obviously fake. They made it to the car where Marcus already had the engine running. Roman practically shoved Isabella into the back seat before sliding in beside her, his jaw clenched tight enough to shatter teeth. "Drive," he told Marcus. The car pulled away from the gala, leaving behind lights and music and the wreckage of whatever public image they'd been trying to build. "Tell me what happened," Isabella said. "One of my warehouses was raided 3 hours ago. Federal agents. They found documents connecting our shipping operations to several illegal imports. Someone tipped them off. Someone with inside information." "How bad is it?" Roman's laugh was bitter. "Bad enough that my lawyers are already working overtime to keep me out of handcuffs. Bad enough that every rival in the city is going to smell blood and come circling. Bad enough that my grandfather is probably going to pull his support entirely." "So Lawrence was right. Your empire is collapsing." Roman's head snapped toward her. "What did Lawrence say to you?" "That you married me as a desperate attempt to look legitimate while everything falls apart around you. That when it does, you'll drag me down with you because that's what you do." "And you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe anymore. You bought me with a contract and told me it was for 12 months. But maybe it's longer than that. Maybe I'm chained to you while you burn." Roman's hand shot out, gripping her chin and forcing her to look at him. "You want the truth? Fine. I am desperate. I did marry you to convince my grandfather I'm capable of building something stable. And yes, there are federal investigations and rival families trying to take what's mine. But I am not letting this empire fall. And I am not letting you drown because of choices I made." "You're not letting me do anything. I'm here because I signed a piece of paper when I was too desperate to think straight." "Then we're the same." The words hung between them, raw and honest. "What do you mean?" Isabella asked. Roman's hand fell away from her face. "My grandfather's dying. Cancer. 6 months, maybe less. He won't sign over control until he's convinced I won't burn everything he built the moment he's gone. I needed a wife to prove I could commit to something other than profit and violence. You needed money to survive. We're both drowning, Isabella. I'm just drowning in money instead of poverty." The car pulled up to the mansion. Marcus got out to open doors, but neither of them moved. "Who tipped off the feds?" Isabella asked quietly. "Someone with access to information they shouldn't have. Someone inside my organization." "You have a traitor." "I have several, probably. That's the nature of this business. You build loyalty with money and fear, but eventually someone decides they can get more money and less fear somewhere else. Isabella thought about the phone calls, the unknown number offering her a way out, the voice saying Roman's enemies were coming. She should tell him, should pull out her phone right now and show him the messages and let him handle the threat. But something stopped her. Maybe it was Lawrence's words about saving herself. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the slowly growing realization that she was trapped in a war she didn't understand between people who saw her as a pawn instead of a person. "I'm tired," she said instead. "Can we go inside?" Roman studied her for a long moment, those gray eyes searching for something. Then he nodded and climbed out of the car. Inside, the mansion felt colder than usual. Maria had left lights on, but they only emphasized the shadows and corners and the silence that pressed down like weight. "Get some sleep," Roman said, already heading toward his study. "Tomorrow I'll have to deal with the fallout from tonight. You'll need to stay out of sight until I know how bad this is." "So I'm a prisoner again." "You're protected. There's a difference." "Not to me." Roman paused at his study door. "Isabella, just let me go to bed." She climbed the stairs without waiting for his response, her gown dragging behind her like chains. In her room, she stripped off the midnight blue silk and stood in front of the mirror in her underwear, staring at the woman looking back. She'd lost weight in the past week. Her collarbones jutted out sharper than before. Dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She looked like exactly what she was. Someone drowning slowly. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Against every instinct screaming at her to ignore it, Isabella answered. "I told you his empire was collapsing," the smooth voice said. "The warehouse raid was just the beginning. In 3 days, federal agents will execute warrants for Roman's arrest. They have witnesses, documents, everything they need to dismantle the Moretti family permanently." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you still have time to save yourself. Meet me tomorrow. Bring information about Roman's business operations, account numbers, contact lists, warehouse locations. Anything that proves you're cooperating. I'll make sure the feds know you were coerced into this marriage. You'll walk away clean. And if I don't, then you go down with him. Conspiracy charges, money laundering, maybe even accessory to murder if they dig deep enough. You'll spend the next 20 years in prison for a man you met a week ago." Isabella's hands shook. "Who are you?" "Someone who can save you. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. There's a coffee shop on Amsterdam and 76th. Come alone. Bring what I asked for. Or don't come at all and accept that you're already dead." The line went dead. Isabella stood there with the phone pressed against her ear long after the call ended, her reflection staring back at her with hollow eyes. Somewhere downstairs she heard Roman's voice. He was on the phone, speaking rapid Italian that sounded like orders or threats or both. She should tell him about the calls, should walk down there right now and show him everything. But the voice on the phone was right about one thing. She didn't owe Roman Moretti her life. She'd signed a contract, agreed to 12 months. Nothing in that paperwork said she had to go to prison for him. Isabella turned off her phone and climbed into bed, but sleep was impossible. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would go to the coffee shop. Not to betray Roman, but to see who was pulling strings from the shadows, to understand what game she'd been pulled into. And maybe, just maybe, to find a way out that didn't involve chains or contracts or drowning alongside a man who'd bought her desperation with gold and silk. The next day crawled by with excruciating slowness. Roman was locked in his study with lawyers and associates, his voice occasionally rising loud enough to carry through walls. Maria moved through the house like a ghost, her usual efficiency replaced with nervous energy that made Isabella's own anxiety spike higher. At 1:30, Isabella told Maria she was going for a walk. "I'll tell Marcus—" "No," Isabella interrupted. "I need to be alone just for an hour, please." Maria's eyes were troubled, but she nodded. "Stay close to the house." Isabella promised she would, then walked out the front door wearing jeans and a jacket and carrying nothing but her phone and wallet. Marcus was stationed by the car, but she waved him off and turned down the sidewalk before he could argue. The coffee shop was a 20-minute walk, long enough that Isabella's hands stopped shaking from adrenaline and started shaking from cold. It was one of those places that tried too hard to be artisanal. Exposed brick, mismatched furniture, baristas with tattoos and attitudes. She ordered coffee she didn't want and sat by the window watching the door. At exactly 2 p.m., a man walked in wearing a gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He was maybe 40, with dark hair starting to silver at the temples and eyes that assessed her the same way Vittorio had, calculating and cold. He sat down across from her without asking permission. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, "thank you for coming." "Who are you?" "Special Agent David Mitchell, FBI." He pulled out a badge and laid it on the table between them. "I've been investigating the Moretti family for 3 years, and I'm offering you one chance to save yourself from what's coming." Isabella's coffee went cold in her hands. "You're the one who's been calling me. Me and my team, we've been monitoring Roman's activities for months. We know about the contract, the marriage, the desperation that made you sign. And we know you're not a criminal, just someone who got caught in a bad situation. What do you want from me?" Mitchell leaned forward. "Information, account numbers, names of Roman's associates, warehouse locations, anything that helps us build a case strong enough to put him away for life. And if I give you that, I just walk away? No charges?" "Full immunity. Witness protection if you want it. A new identity, new city, enough money to start over. All you have to do is testify that Roman coerced you into marriage as part of his criminal operations." Isabella's throat felt tight. "He'll kill me. He'll be in custody before he knows you talked, and by the time he gets out, if he gets out, you'll be somewhere he can't find you." It was everything she'd wanted a week ago. Freedom. Money. A future that didn't involve contracts and cages. "There's one problem," Isabella said slowly. "What's that?" "I don't have any information. I've been in that house for a week. Roman doesn't tell me anything, doesn't let me near his business. I'm a prop, a performance piece. I couldn't give you account numbers or warehouse locations, even if I wanted to." Mitchell's expression didn't change. "Then get them. You're his wife. You have access to his home, his office, his computers. Find what we need, and I'll get you out." "You want me to spy on him?" "I want you to save yourself." Isabella stood up, her chair scraping against the floor. "I'm not doing this." "Then you're going to prison alongside him." Mitchell stood too, his voice hardening. "The warrants are already written. 3 days, Mrs. Moretti. That's all the time you have to decide whether you're a criminal or a victim. Choose wisely." He walked out, leaving his business card on the table beside her untouched coffee. Isabella stood there shaking, her mind racing through options that all led to the same conclusion. She was trapped between federal agents who saw her as a tool and a husband who saw her as a second chance at redemption and a contract that bound her to a sinking ship. She walked back to the mansion in a daze, barely registering the streets or the cold or the way Marcus looked at her when she finally returned. "Where were you?" he asked. "Walking, thinking. Mr. Moretti wants to see you in his study." Isabella's stomach dropped. Did he know? Had Mitchell been watching the house? Had someone seen her at the coffee shop? She climbed the stairs on legs that felt like they might give out and knocked on the study door. "Come in." Roman sat behind his desk, but he wasn't working. He was just sitting there with a glass of scotch untouched beside him, staring at nothing. "Close the door," he said quietly. Isabella obeyed, her heart pounding. "I know what you did today," Roman said. The world tilted. "Roman, you left the house without Marcus, walked 20 minutes to a coffee shop, met with someone who showed you a badge." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were empty. "Did you really think I wouldn't have you followed?" Isabella's mouth went dry. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." "They've been calling me, threatening me, saying you're about to be arrested and I'll go down with you unless I cooperate. Today was the first time I actually met him face to face." "And did you cooperate?" "No." "Did you give him information?" "I don't have any information to give." Roman stood, moving around the desk with the kind of controlled fury that made the air feel dangerous. "But you considered it, didn't you? Sat there listening to his offer. Freedom, money, witness protection. Everything I gave you, but without the contract attached. I went to see what they wanted." "You went because you're looking for an exit." His voice was cold enough to freeze blood. "Because despite everything, the house, the money, the protection, you still see me as the enemy instead of the person keeping you alive." "You're not keeping me alive, Roman. You bought me. There's a difference. I saved you from eviction and poverty and sleeping in your goddamn car. You chained me to a criminal empire that's about to collapse and take me with it. The words exploded between them, raw and vicious. Roman's jaw clenched. Get out. Roman, get the fuck out of my study before I do something we'll both regret. Isabella backed toward the door, her hands shaking. What happens now? Now? Roman's laugh was bitter. Now I figure out how to survive a federal investigation while married to a woman who's already planning how to betray me. Should be easy. Isabella opened her mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped her cold. She'd seen him angry, cold, calculating. This was different. This was hurt. And somehow that was worse. She left the study and climbed the stairs to her room, her phone buzzing with another message from Mitchell's number. 48 hours, Mrs. Moretti, clock's ticking. Isabella threw her phone across the room and watched it hit the wall, the screen cracking in a spiderweb pattern that matched how she felt inside. Outside her door, she heard footsteps. They paused, but this time they didn't move on. The door opened. Roman stood there, still wearing the fury from downstairs, but underneath it was something raw, something desperate. Tell me the truth, he said. Are you going to betray me? Isabella met his eyes. I don't know. That's not good enough. It's all I have. Roman stepped into the room, and suddenly the space felt too small for the violence and desperation radiating off him. You want to know why I really married you? He asked. Why I picked you out of thousands of desperate people in this city? You said I reminded you of your sister. You reminded me of who I used to be before this empire ate everything human out of me. You reminded me that people can be desperate and scared and still make choices, bad choices, terrible choices, but choices. His voice cracked. And I thought maybe if I could save you, it would mean I wasn't completely lost yet. Isabella's chest felt tight. Roman, but I was wrong. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. And you... He gestured at her, at the room, at everything. You don't want this, don't want me. You just want to survive long enough to escape. And that's fine, that's fair. But don't pretend you're any different than the federal agents trying to use you to destroy me. You're all just playing the same game. He turned to leave, and Isabella's voice stopped him. What happened to Elena? Roman froze in the doorway. I read the articles, Isabella continued. Suspected overdose. Found in a rival family's warehouse. But that's not the whole story, is it? Roman's shoulders were rigid. She signed a contract with people who promised her a modeling career. Instead, they trafficked her, used her, broke her. By the time I found her, she'd been captive for 11 months. She died in my arms asking me why I didn't save her sooner. The words landed like bullets. I'm sorry, Isabella whispered. Don't be. Just make your choice. Betray me to the FBI and save yourself, or stay here and drown with me. Either way, I'm done trying to save people who see me as the enemy. He left, and this time the door closed with a finality that felt like a coffin lid. Isabella sank onto the bed. Her phone cracked on the floor beside her, Mitchell's deadline ticking down in her head. 48 hours. 2 days to decide whether she was a survivor or a traitor. 2 days to choose between freedom and something she couldn't quite name, but that felt like it mattered more than her own survival. Outside, thunder rumbled across Manhattan, and Isabella realized with a clarity that made her stomach turn that she'd already made her choice. Not when she walked into that coffee shop, not when Mitchell offered her immunity, but the moment Roman told her about Elena and the desperate, futile hope that saving Isabella would somehow balance the ledger of his failures. She was going to stay. Not because of the contract, not because she loved him, but because she finally understood what he'd meant when he said they were both drowning. Sometimes you chose to sink with someone because drowning alone felt worse. And maybe, just maybe, they could keep each other above water long enough to figure out if survival was worth the cost of staying human. Isabella picked up her cracked phone and deleted Mitchell's number. Deleted all the messages. Deleted the evidence that she'd ever considered. Isabella didn't go downstairs that night. She sat on her bed with her cracked phone in her lap and Mitchell's deadline burning in her mind like a countdown to execution. 48 hours. 2 days to choose between survival and something that felt uncomfortably like loyalty to a man she barely knew but understood too well. Around midnight, she heard Roman's footsteps in the hallway again. They stopped outside her door. She held her breath, waiting. The silence stretched so long she thought maybe she'd imagined it. Then she heard him speak, his voice muffled through the wood but clear enough. "I know you're awake." Isabella didn't answer. "I shouldn't have said those things. About Elena. About you being the same as the FBI agents. You're not." A pause. "You're just trying to survive. I understand that better than anyone." Still, Isabella stayed silent. "Tomorrow morning, my lawyers are filing motions to block the federal warrants. It's a long shot, but it might buy us time. Time to figure out who leaked information about the warehouse. Time to shore up the organization before everything collapses." Another pause, longer this time. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're caught in. Whether you stay or run, at least you'll know the truth." His footsteps retreated down the hallway, and Isabella finally exhaled. She didn't sleep. Instead, she thought about Elena, about contracts signed in desperation, about the difference between being saved and being owned, about Roman's tattooed hands and the roses on his wrist that represented every person he'd lost. By morning, exhaustion made her thoughts fuzzy around the edges, but her decision remained solid. She was staying, not forever, just long enough to see this through, to understand what happened when empires built on sand finally collapsed, to prove to herself that she could choose something other than pure survival for once. Downstairs, the mansion felt like a pressure cooker about to explode. Marcus stood by the front door with two other security guards Isabella had never seen before. Maria moved through the kitchen with hands that trembled when she poured coffee, and Roman's voice carried from the study in sharp bursts of Italian that sounded like orders being issued to soldiers preparing for war. Isabella poured herself coffee and stood by the kitchen window watching the street. Normal people walked dogs, checked their phones, lived entire lives that didn't involve federal investigations and criminal empires. "Miss Isabella." She turned. Marcus stood in the doorway, his expression grim. "Mr. Moretti wants to see you, now." Isabella set down her coffee and followed him to the study where Roman stood surrounded by three men in expensive suits who radiated the kind of dangerous competence that came from years of navigating legal systems designed to destroy people like them. "Gentlemen," Roman said when Isabella entered, "this is my wife. She needs to understand what's happening." The oldest lawyer, maybe 60, with silver hair and eyes that had seen everything, nodded at Isabella. "Mrs. Moretti, I'm Jonathan Pierce. I've represented your husband's family for 15 years. What I'm about to tell you is confidential and potentially incriminating. Do you understand?" Isabella's throat felt dry. "Yes. The federal investigation into your husband's business operations has escalated beyond what we initially anticipated. They have witnesses, documents, financial records that connect several of his shipping companies to illegal imports. The warrants for his arrest will be executed within 36 hours unless we can successfully argue that the evidence was obtained illegally. Can you argue that?" Pierce's expression suggested the answer was no, but he was too professional to say it outright. "We're exploring all options." "What he means," Roman said, his voice flat, "is that I'm going to be arrested, probably by tomorrow night. The question is whether the charges stick long enough to destroy everything, or whether we can create enough reasonable doubt to keep me out of prison." Isabella's hands clenched at her sides. "And what happens to me?" "That depends," Pierce said carefully, "on whether the FBI believes you were complicit in your husband's activities or merely an unknowing participant." "I've been here a week. I don't know anything about his business." "But you did meet with Special Agent Mitchell yesterday, in a coffee shop, alone." The words landed like a punch. Isabella's eyes snapped to Roman, who watched her with an expression that revealed nothing. "How did you—" "I told you," Roman interrupted. "I had you followed. Marcus documented the entire meeting, which means I know Mitchell offered you immunity in exchange for testimony, and I know you deleted his contact information from your phone afterward." Pierce cleared his throat. "Mrs. Moretti, if you're planning to cooperate with federal authorities, I need to know now so we can adjust our legal strategy accordingly." All three lawyers watched her. Marcus stood by the door with his hand resting casually near his holster, and Roman's gray eyes held hers with the kind of intensity that felt like he was trying to read her soul. "I'm not cooperating with the FBI," Isabella said. "Why not?" Pierce asked. "They offered you immunity, protection. Everything you'd need to walk away from this situation unscathed. Because Isabella's eyes stayed locked on Roman. Because I made a deal. 12 months. I don't break deals just because they get difficult. Something shifted in Roman's expression. Not relief. Something raw. Like he'd been braced for betrayal and her answer had knocked the wind out of him. Then we need to prepare you, Pierce said. The FBI will likely attempt to question you once Roman is in custody. They'll use every tactic available to convince you to testify against him. Threats, promises, pressure. You need to understand how to protect yourself legally. The next 2 hours were a crash course in asserting Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to answer questions without legal representation, and understanding the difference between being a witness and being complicit. Isabella's head spun with legal terminology and warnings about perjury and the very real possibility that she could end up charged as an accomplice if prosecutors decided she knew more than she claimed. By the time Pierce and his associates left, Isabella felt like she'd been beaten with a dictionary of criminal law. Roman poured himself scotch, even though it was barely noon. You should have taken the immunity deal. You don't actually believe that. I believe you're about to make your life significantly harder for a man you met 8 days ago. He drank half the scotch in one swallow. That's either incredibly loyal or incredibly stupid. Maybe both. Roman's laugh was bitter. Probably. Isabella moved to the window, staring out at the street where plainclothes federal agents had started appearing. She'd noticed them this morning, too clean, too alert, watching the house with the kind of focused attention that suggested surveillance. They're already here, she said. They've been here for weeks, just getting bolder now that they think they have enough evidence. Roman joined her at the window, standing close enough that she could smell his cologne mixed with exhaustion. There's something I need to tell you about the warehouse raid. What about it? The documents they found weren't mine. I mean, they were in my warehouse, but someone planted them there. Falsified records designed to make it look like I'm running a trafficking operation. Isabella's stomach turned cold. Trafficking? Like Elena. Roman's jaw clenched. Someone is trying to destroy me by making it look like I became the same thing that killed my sister. And they're doing it using federal agents who think they're taking down a legitimate criminal operation. Who would do that? Someone who knows my history. Someone with access to federal resources. Someone who wants me destroyed completely instead of just arrested. Isabella's mind raced through the past week. The phone calls from Mitchell, the pressure to betray Roman, the way the FBI seemed to know exactly when and where to apply leverage. Mitchell, she breathed, he's not just investigating you, he's orchestrating your downfall. Maybe. Or he's being used by someone else. Roman turned from the window. Either way, I have 36 hours to figure out who's pulling the strings before I'm in custody and powerless to stop them. What do you need me to do? Roman's eyes locked onto hers. Stay alive. Stay out of the way. And if something happens to me, get out of this city as fast as you can. I'm not running. Isabella, I said I'm not running. You don't get to chain me to you for 12 months and then tell me to abandon you the moment things get dangerous. That's not how this works. This isn't a marriage, it's a contract. Then I'm fulfilling the terms. Isabella stepped closer. You wanted a wife who makes you look stable, who stands beside you when everything collapses. That's what I'm doing. Roman's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone in that gesture that always felt like possession and tenderness wrapped together. You're either the bravest or most foolish woman I've ever met. Probably both, she echoed his earlier words. His lips curved into something that might have been a smile if the situation wasn't so desperate. Then his phone buzzed with a message that made his entire expression harden into stone. What? Isabella asked. My grandfather wants to see us. Now. At the estate in Connecticut. Is that safe? With federal agents watching? He doesn't care about safe. He wants answers before I'm arrested. Wants to know if this marriage is real or just another manipulation. Roman's eyes bored into hers. Can you convince him that we're really married? That you're actually choosing to stay? Because if he thinks you're being coerced or threatened into standing beside me, he'll assume the entire marriage is a sham and pull his support completely, which means the organization collapses even faster. Isabella thought about the past 8 days. The contract, the desperation, The slowly growing understanding that she and Roman were both drowning in different ways. I can convince him, she said. How? Because it's not a lie anymore. I am choosing to stay. Not because of the contract, because... She paused, searching for words that made sense. Because someone has to. Roman studied her face like he was trying to memorize every detail. Then he nodded once. Get dressed. Something appropriate for meeting an old man who can smell weakness from across a room. An hour later, they were in the back of the Mercedes with Marcus driving and 2 additional security vehicles flanking them. The drive to Connecticut took 90 minutes through traffic that felt like it was actively conspiring to delay them. Isabella watched the city give way to suburbs, give way to countryside, while Roman made phone calls in rapid Italian, issuing orders that sounded increasingly desperate. The Moretti estate appeared through bare trees like something from a different century. Stone walls, iron gates. A main house that looked like it had been transplanted from Tuscany and dropped onto 20 acres of Connecticut woodland. Guards stood at intervals along the driveway, and Isabella counted at least 3 cameras tracking their approach. Your grandfather lives here? She asked. He built it 30 years ago when he finally had enough money to stop living like he was still in Sicily. Roman's voice was tight. Everything you see is a monument to survival, to clawing your way out of poverty through violence and determination. He wants me to prove I understand that legacy. They pulled up to the main house where Vittorio stood on the steps wearing a black suit and an expression that could freeze blood. Isabella climbed out of the car on legs that threatened to buckle. Roman's hand settled on her lower back. That possessive gesture she was starting to recognize as equal parts protection and warning. No, Roman said, kissing his grandfather's cheeks. You wanted to see us. Inside. Vittorio's eyes swept over Isabella with the kind of assessment that made her feel transparent. Both of you. The interior of the estate was all old-world elegance. Dark wood, leather furniture, artwork that probably belonged in museums. But it was the silence that struck Isabella most, the heavy, suffocating quiet of spaces where terrible decisions had been made. Vittorio led them to a study that felt like a throne room. He sat behind a massive desk while Roman and Isabella stood before him like subjects awaiting judgment. The federal agents will arrest you tomorrow, Vittorio said without preamble. I've spoken with our contacts. The warrants are signed. The evidence is substantial. You will be charged with trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy. I know, Roman said. Do you also know that someone inside our organization provided that evidence to the FBI? I suspected. And do you know who? Roman's jaw clenched. Not yet. Then you're a fool. Vittorio's voice cut like a blade. A man who doesn't know where the knife is coming from deserves to be stabbed. No. Silence. The old man's eyes shifted to Isabella. You, girl, why are you still here? Isabella's throat felt tight. Because I made a commitment. To what? A marriage built on lies? To 12 months of my life in exchange for stability. That was the deal. Nothing in the contract said I could walk away if things got difficult. Vittorio leaned back, studying her. The FBI offered you immunity. I know. And you refused. Yes. Why? Isabella met his gray eyes. So similar to Roman's, but carved with decades more violence and survival. Because running away is what desperate people do when they're alone. I'm tired of being alone. The silence that followed was so complete Isabella could hear her own heartbeat. Then Vittorio smiled. It was the saddest smile she'd ever seen. You love him, the old man said quietly. Maybe you don't know it yet. Maybe you don't want to admit it, but you love my grandson enough to drown with him instead of saving yourself. That is either the greatest act of loyalty I've ever witnessed, or the greatest act of foolishness. I don't, Isabella started, but the words died in her throat. Because maybe Vittorio was right. Maybe somewhere between the contract and the coffee shop meeting and deleting Mitchell's number, she'd stopped seeing Roman as her captor and started seeing him as someone equally trapped. And maybe that was close enough to love for government work. I don't care what you call it, Isabella said instead. I'm staying. Vittorio nodded once. Then you need to know what's coming. Roman will be arrested. The trial will be a spectacle designed to destroy everything I built. Our enemies will circle. Federal prosecutors will offer you deals. Reporters will camp outside your door, and through all of it, you will be tested in ways you cannot imagine. I understand. No, you don't. Vittorio stood, moving around the desk with surprising grace for a man his age. But you will. And when that moment comes, when you're sitting in a witness box being asked to choose between your freedom and my grandson's life, you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that loyalty is the only currency that matters in our world. And you'll decide whether you're truly a Moretti or just a girl who signed a piece of paper. He left the room without another word, and Isabella stood there shaking while Roman's hand tightened on her back. Are you okay? He asked quietly. No. Isabella turned to face him. I'm terrified. I'm exhausted. And I'm pretty sure I just promised your grandfather I'd commit perjury if necessary to protect you, which is illegal and insane and… Roman kissed her. It wasn't gentle, wasn't tender. It was desperate and fierce and tasted like scotch and fear. His hands came up to frame her face while hers grabbed fistfuls of his jacket, and for a moment the entire world narrowed to just the two of them and the shared understanding that they were both about to go under. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Roman pressed his forehead against hers. I don't deserve this, he said. Don't deserve you standing here when you should be running. Maybe I don't deserve a lot of things. Doesn't mean I'm not taking them anyway. His laugh was broken. We're both going to drown. Probably, but at least we won't be alone. They stayed like that for a long moment, wrapped around each other in Vittorio's study, while somewhere outside federal agents prepared warrants and rivals sharpened knives, and the empire Roman had built from his grandfather's legacy prepared to collapse. Then Roman's phone buzzed again. He pulled back to check it, and Isabella watched his expression transform from vulnerable to violent in the space of a heartbeat. What? She demanded. I know who the traitor is. Roman's voice was cold enough to freeze blood. David Chen, my senior counsel, the man who officiated our marriage. He's been feeding information to the FBI for 6 months in exchange for immunity on his own criminal charges. Isabella's stomach dropped. Chen? But he was the one who processed your contract, who knew exactly how desperate you were, who probably told Mitchell when and where to apply pressure. Roman's hands clenched into fists. He played us both. Where's he now? In my Manhattan office, probably shredding documents and preparing to disappear before I figure it out. Roman was already moving toward the door, phone pressed to his ear, issuing orders in Italian that sounded like violence wrapped in words. Isabella followed him back to the car, where Marcus already had the engine running. Take us to Moretti Tower, Roman told him. Fast. The drive back to Manhattan was 90 minutes of Roman making calls and issuing orders, while Isabella sat beside him watching the countryside blur past and understanding with crystalline clarity that whatever happened next would determine whether they both survived or went down together. By the time they reached the city, night had fallen, and the skyscrapers glittered like broken glass under sodium lights. Moretti Tower rose 45 stories above Midtown, all steel and glass and the illusion of legitimacy. Roman's private elevator took them straight to the 40th floor, where his main office occupied a corner with views of Manhattan spread out like a kingdom. The hallway was empty, too quiet. Marcus moved ahead, hand on his weapon, checking corners. Roman's office door stood open. Inside, David Chen sat behind Roman's desk wearing a gray suit and an expression that suggested he'd been waiting. Hello, Roman, Chen said calmly. I wondered when you'd figure it out. Roman moved into the office with the kind of controlled fury that made the air feel electric. Isabella stayed in the doorway with Marcus, her heart pounding. 6 months, Roman said. You've been betraying me for 6 months. I've been surviving, Chen corrected. The FBI had evidence of my involvement in several of your less legal operations. They offered me immunity in exchange for cooperation. I took the deal. You destroyed evidence, falsified documents, made it look like I'm running a trafficking operation. I gave them what they wanted to hear, made their case stronger. It's nothing personal, Roman, just business. Business? Roman's voice was deadly quiet. You used my sister's death to frame me, planted documents connecting me to trafficking networks, made it look like I became the monster that killed Elena. Chen's expression finally flickered. That was unfortunate, but necessary to ensure the FBI took the case seriously. Roman moved so fast, Isabella barely saw it. One moment he was standing across the desk. The next, he had Chen by the throat, slamming him against the window hard enough to crack the glass. "You don't get to use her name," Roman snarled. "You don't get to weaponize her death against me." "Roman?" Isabella started forward, but Marcus caught her arm. "Don't," Marcus said quietly. "Let him handle this." Chen clawed at Roman's hand, gasping for air. "The FBI will be here in minutes." "Good." Roman's grip tightened. "Let them find your body." "Roman, stop." Isabella pulled free from Marcus and crossed the office. "Don't do this." "He destroyed everything. Used you, used Elena's memory. He deserves prison, not death." Isabella's hand touched Roman's arm, feeling the tension thrumming through him like electricity. "You kill him now. You prove every terrible thing the FBI believes about you. You prove your grandfather was wrong to trust you. You prove I was wrong to stay." Roman's eyes met hers, gray and full of violence and pain. "He betrayed us," Roman said. "I know. But killing him won't fix that. It'll just make everything worse." For a long moment, Isabella thought he wouldn't listen. Thought she'd have to watch him cross a line there was no coming back from. Then Roman released Chen, who collapsed against the window, gasping. "You're right," Roman said quietly. "He's not worth it." Chen wheezed, rubbing his throat. "You're finished, Moretti." The office doors burst open. Special Agent Mitchell stormed in with 6 armed FBI agents, weapons drawn, faces grim. "Roman Moretti," Mitchell announced. "You're under arrest for trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, and assault. Get on your knees. Hands behind your head." Roman stood perfectly still, his eyes on Isabella. "Remember what I told you. Get out of the city. Don't look back." "I'm not leaving," Isabella said. "Isabella, I said I'm not leaving." Mitchell nodded to 2 agents who moved forward with handcuffs. They forced Roman to his knees, wrenching his arms back hard enough that Isabella saw him wince. "You too, Mrs. Moretti," Mitchell said. "You're being detained for questioning." "She doesn't know anything," Roman growled as the handcuffs locked around his wrists. "She's not part of this." "Then she has nothing to hide," Mitchell gestured to another agent. "Take her to the field office, separate interrogation room." Isabella felt hands on her arms, guiding her toward the door. She looked back at Roman kneeling on the floor of his own office, with federal agents surrounding him, and Chen watching from the window with satisfaction in his eyes. "Roman," she called. He looked up, and for just a moment the mask slipped and she saw fear. Not for himself. For her. "Don't tell them anything," he said. "Not one word without Pierce present. Promise me." "I promise," Isabella said. Then she was being moved down the hallway toward elevators, away from Roman, away from the office, away from everything except the slowly sinking realization that they'd both just lost the war they'd been trying to fight. In the elevator, Mitchell stood beside her while other agents flanked them. "You made a mistake, Mrs. Moretti," he said conversationally. "Could have had immunity. Could have walked away clean. Now you're going to spend the next several hours being questioned about your involvement in your husband's criminal enterprise. And trust me, we will find something to charge you with. Conspiracy. Obstruction. Accessory after the fact. One way or another, you're going down with him." Isabella didn't respond, just stood there watching the numbers descend. 35, 28, 19, what? While her hand shook and her mind raced through every legal warning Pierce had drilled into her. Say nothing without legal representation. Assert Fifth Amendment rights on every question. Do not let them intimidate you into admissions. The elevator reached the lobby. FBI vehicles lined the street outside, lights flashing in the darkness. Reporters had already gathered, cameras rolling, capturing footage of Isabella being led from the building in handcuffs. Tomorrow, her face would be on every news site in America. The Mafia wife, the woman who stood by her criminal husband. The fool who chose loyalty over freedom. But tonight, being pushed into the back of an FBI vehicle, while Roman was loaded into a separate car destined for holding cells and processing, Isabella felt something she hadn't expected. Not fear, not regret, but a strange, fierce certainty that she'd made the right choice, even if it destroyed her, even if it meant drowning. Because for the first time in her life, she'd chosen something other than pure survival. She'd chosen someone. And whatever happened next, interrogations, trials, Prison? Ruin? At least she wouldn't face it alone. The car pulled away from Moretti Tower, sirens wailing, while behind them Chen stood in the window watching them go. And Isabella realized with crystal clarity that the real battle wasn't over. It was just beginning. The interrogation room was exactly what Isabella expected. Concrete walls painted institutional beige, a metal table bolted to the floor, fluorescent lights that hummed with the kind of frequency designed to make you want to confess just to escape the sound. She sat in a chair that was slightly too low, another psychological tactic, while Mitchell and a female agent whose nameplate read Santos sat across from her with folders full of what she assumed were lies, mixed with enough truth to be dangerous. They'd been at it for 3 hours. 3 hours of questions she refused to answer without legal representation. 3 hours of Mitchell's voice alternating between sympathetic and threatening. 3 hours of Santos sliding photographs across the table, warehouses, shipping manifests, bank statements, while asking Isabella to explain things she'd never seen before in her life. "Mrs. Moretti," Mitchell said for what felt like the 100th time, "we know you're protecting him. We know you think you're being loyal, but Roman doesn't care about you. You're a prop, a performance piece designed to make him look legitimate while he runs a criminal empire." Isabella stared at the two-way mirror behind them and said nothing. "We have David Chen's testimony," Santos added, her voice softer than Mitchell's, but no less calculated. "He's willing to testify that Roman coerced you into this marriage, that you were desperate, unemployed, and vulnerable. That makes you a victim, Isabella, not a criminal, but only if you cooperate." Still, Isabella stayed silent. Mitchell slammed his hand on the table hard enough to make her flinch. "God damn it, we're trying to save you. Roman Moretti is going to prison for 20 years minimum, maybe life. You standing by him doesn't change that. It just destroys your life too. Is that what you want? To throw away your future for a man who bought you with a contract?" Isabella's eyes finally shifted from the mirror to meet his. "I want my lawyer." "You've said that 50 times. Then maybe you should listen." Isabella leaned forward. "I'm not answering questions without Jonathan Pierce present. That's my right. Keep me here as long as you want, but I'm not saying one more word." Mitchell and Santos exchanged glances. Some silent communication passed between them that Isabella couldn't read. "Fine," Mitchell said, standing. "You want to play it that way? You'll be held as a material witness. No bail. No contact with Roman. You'll sit in a cell until you decide cooperation is better than loyalty." They left her alone in the interrogation room for another hour, long enough that Isabella's back started to ache from the uncomfortable chair. Long enough that she started to wonder if maybe Mitchell was right and she was destroying herself for someone who'd never asked her to. Then the door opened and Jonathan Pierce walked in, wearing an expression that suggested he'd fought his way through multiple federal agents to get there. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, sitting down across from her. "Are you all right?" "I didn't tell them anything." "Good. That's good." Pierce pulled out a legal pad and pen. "I need you to tell me exactly what happened. Every question they asked, every photograph they showed you, everything." Isabella recounted the interrogation while Pierce took notes in handwriting so precise it looked mechanical. When she finished, he sat back and exhaled slowly. "They don't have anything solid connecting you to Roman's criminal activities," he said, "which means they're fishing, hoping you'll panic and provide evidence they can use. The fact that you invoked your right to counsel is excellent. They can't use that against you." "What about Roman?" "Roman is being held without bail pending arraignment. The charges are substantial: trafficking, money laundering, conspiracy, assault. Chen's testimony is damaging, and the evidence from the warehouse raid is being presented as proof of ongoing criminal enterprise." Isabella's hands clenched on the table. "It was all planted. Roman said someone falsified those documents." "Roman says a lot of things. What matters is what we can prove in court." Pierce met her eyes. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Did Roman ever discuss his business operations with you? Ever show you documents, introduce you to associates, involve you in any way that could be construed as participation in criminal activity?" "No, never. I've been in that house for 8 days. He kept me completely separate from his work." "And the marriage? How did that actually happen?" Isabella told him. "The job interview. The contract she thought was employment. The realization too late that she'd signed a marriage certificate. Chen officiating, Roman explaining the arrangement. Pierce listened without interrupting, his expression revealing nothing. That's coercion, he said when she finished. Potentially fraud. We could argue you were tricked into this marriage. Use that to establish you're a victim, not an accomplice. No. Isabella, I said no. I'm not claiming I was coerced. I signed that contract, made that choice. I'm not going to stand up in court and say I'm some helpless victim who didn't know what she was doing, even if it keeps you out of prison. Even then, Pierce studied her for a long moment. You're protecting him. I'm protecting myself. If I stand up there and say I was tricked, coerced, manipulated, I'm admitting I have no agency, no judgment, that I'm someone who can be pushed into signing away my life without thinking. That's not who I am. That's not who I want to be. You'd rather go to prison? I'd rather tell the truth. I was desperate. I signed a contract. I stayed because I chose to. Those are the facts. Whatever consequences come from that, I'll deal with them. Pierce closed his legal pad. You're either incredibly brave or incredibly foolish. I haven't decided which yet. He stood. I'm going to get you released as a material witness. The FBI can't hold you without charging you, and they don't have enough evidence to file charges. But Isabella, they will keep investigating, keep watching, keep looking for any connection between you and Roman's activities. Be very careful what you do and say in the coming weeks. When can I see Roman? Not until after arraignment. Maybe not even then, depending on the judge. He's being classified as a flight risk and potential danger to witnesses. They'll keep him isolated. Pierce moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I've known Roman Moretti for 15 years. Watched him build an empire through intelligence and ruthlessness. In all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looked at you when they put him in handcuffs. Make of that what you will. He left, and Isabella sat alone in the interrogation room, wondering what you were supposed to make of a look that said, I'm sorry, and don't leave me, and you should have run when you had the chance all at once. 2 hours later, she was released onto the street outside the FBI field office with nothing but her cracked phone and the clothes she'd been wearing when they arrested her. It was past midnight. The city glittered around her like broken promises. Marcus was waiting by the curb in the Mercedes. Mrs. Moretti, he said, opening the door. I'm to take you back to the house. How did you... Mr. Pierce called, said you'd need a ride. Isabella climbed into the car, her entire body aching from exhaustion and stress. Have you heard anything about Roman? He's being held in federal detention. Arraignment is set for tomorrow morning. Mr. Vittorio is already arranging bail, but given the charges, it's unlikely to be granted. The drive back to the mansion felt longer than it should have. The house was dark when they arrived, except for lights left on by Maria. Inside, everything was exactly as they'd left it. Roman's study door open, his desk covered in papers, the scent of his cologne still lingering in the air. Isabella climbed the stairs to her room and stood in the doorway staring at the bed she'd barely slept in. She should shower, change, sleep. But her body felt disconnected from her brain, running on autopilot through motions that didn't quite make sense. She ended up in Roman's study instead, sitting in his chair behind his massive desk, running her fingers over papers she didn't understand. Legal documents, financial statements, letters in Italian she couldn't fully translate. This was his world, the empire he'd built from his grandfather's legacy, and now federal prosecutors were tearing it apart piece by piece while looking for ways to destroy him completely. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. Isabella almost ignored it, then curiosity won. Hello? Mrs. Moretti, I thought you should know. David Chen is dead. The world tilted. What? They found him in his apartment an hour ago. Single gunshot to the head. Suicide, according to initial reports, though we both know that's not what happened. Who is this? Someone who understands the game better than you do. Chen betrayed Roman. Roman sent a message. Now everyone knows what happens when you turn on the Moretti family. You should remember that, Isabella, because sooner or later you'll have to choose between saving yourself and protecting a murderer. The line went dead. Isabella sat frozen in Roman's chair with her phone pressed against her ear and her mind racing. Chen was dead. Maybe suicide. Maybe murder. Maybe something in between. And somewhere in federal detention, Roman sat in a cell either knowing about it or about to find out. She should call Pierce, should report the threatening phone call, should do something other than sit here in the dark, wondering if the man she'd chosen to stand beside was capable of ordering hits from prison. But exhaustion won. Isabella stumbled back to her room, collapsed onto the bed still wearing yesterday's clothes, and fell into sleep that was more like unconsciousness. She woke to Maria knocking on her door with coffee, and the news that Roman's arraignment was in 2 hours and Vittorio wanted her there. The courthouse was a circus. Reporters lined the steps with cameras and microphones. Protesters held signs about organized crime and corruption. Federal agents created a perimeter while Isabella was hustled through a side entrance by Marcus and 2 other guards Vittorio had sent. Inside, the courtroom was all wood paneling and uncomfortable benches and the oppressive weight of government authority. Vittorio sat in the front row wearing black and an expression that could crack granite. He nodded at Isabella when she slid into the seat beside him, but didn't speak. The proceedings started with bureaucratic efficiency. The judge, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human failure, read the charges in a voice that made each word sound like a nail being hammered into a coffin. Then they brought Roman in. He wore an orange jumpsuit that made his olive skin look sallow. His hands were cuffed in front of him. His hair was disheveled. But his eyes, those pale gray eyes that had watched her sign a contract 8 days ago, found hers immediately and held them while the judge asked how he pleaded. "Not guilty," Roman said clearly. The prosecution argued he was a flight risk, a danger to witnesses, a man with resources and connections to disappear if granted bail. They presented Chen's testimony, the warehouse evidence, financial records showing money moving through shell corporations. Pierce countered with arguments about presumption of innocence and lack of direct evidence, and the prosecution's reliance on testimony from a witness who'd since committed suicide under suspicious circumstances. The judge listened to both sides with the expression of someone who'd heard these arguments 1,000 times before. "Bail is denied," she said finally. "The defendant will remain in federal custody pending trial. Next court date is set for 3 weeks from today for preliminary hearings." The gavel came down, and Isabella watched guards move to take Roman away. He looked back at her one more time, mouthed something that might have been, "I'm sorry," or maybe "stay safe," or possibly "run." Then he was gone, and the courtroom emptied, and Isabella sat beside Vittorio while reporters rushed out to file stories about the Mafia boss denied bail. "Come," Vittorio said quietly. "We need to talk." They went to a cafe 2 blocks from the courthouse where Vittorio's guards cleared the back room and stood watch while he ordered espresso and sat across from Isabella with the weight of 70 years of violence and survival in his eyes. "Chen's death," he said without preamble. "The news says suicide. And what does the truth say? The truth says he betrayed my family, and betrayal has consequences." Vittorio's fingers wrapped around his tiny espresso cup. "I did not order his death, but I did not mourn it either. Did Roman eat? Roman is in federal custody. He couldn't have ordered anything even if he wanted to, which means someone else in the organization decided to send a message." Vittorio's eyes locked onto hers. "Do you understand what that means?" Isabella's throat felt tight. "That there are others protecting Roman's interests while he's locked up. That the empire is stabilizing, proving it can function without him at the helm. Proving to federal prosecutors that arresting one man doesn't destroy what we've built." Vittorio leaned forward. "You asked me once what happens now. This is what happens. We fight. We protect our people. We make sure Roman's arrest becomes an inconvenience instead of a catastrophe. And what's my role in that? You stand beside him, publicly, visibly. You show the world that his wife believes in his innocence. That belief matters, Isabella. It shifts narratives, makes juries see a man with a family instead of a monster with crimes. You want me to be a prop. I want you to be what you've already chosen to be, his wife. For better or worse, in federal custody and freedom. That's what marriage means in our world." Isabella drank her coffee even though it burned going down. "What if he's convicted? Then you visit him in prison until he's released or dead. Whichever comes first." Vittorio's voice was matter-of-fact. "That's the life you signed up for. The contract didn't specify only the good parts. The contract was supposed to be fake, and yet here you are, sitting across from a dying old man who's trying to figure out if you're strong enough to survive what's coming." Vittorio set down his cup. My grandson made many mistakes in his life, but bringing you into this family might be the first thing he's done right in years. You have spine, heart, loyalty. That's worth more than all the money and power he's accumulated. He bought me with that contract. He saved you. There's a difference. And you saved him by staying when you could have run. That makes you even. Vittorio stood, moving with the careful precision of someone whose body was betraying him. Go home. Rest. The trial will be long and brutal. You'll need your strength. Isabella watched him leave with his guards flanking him like an aging king, still commanding loyalty even as death circled closer. She took a cab back to the mansion because Marcus had disappeared with Vittorio, and she couldn't face calling him back. The house felt emptier than ever. Roman's study door was still open, his chair still pushed back from where she'd sat in it last night. His world frozen in the moment before federal agents had torn it all apart. Isabella climbed the stairs to her room and stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. She looked like hell. Dark circles under her eyes, hair unwashed, the same clothes she'd been wearing for 36 hours. She showered until the hot water ran cold, changed into jeans and a sweater, tried to sleep but ended up staring at the ceiling instead. Her phone buzzed with a news alert. Moretti trial set to begin in 3 weeks. Wife stands by accused crime boss. There was a photo of her sitting beside Vittorio in the courtroom. She looked exhausted and determined and trapped, exactly like she felt. The comments section was predictably vicious. Gold digger standing by her meal ticket. She's either stupid or complicit. Probably both. Isabella closed the browser and threw her phone across the room again. It hit the wall in almost the exact same spot as before, spiderwebbing the screen further. Days blurred together after that. Pierce filed motions and prepared arguments and sent Isabella updates she barely understood. Vittorio checked in daily with phone calls that felt more like military briefings than conversations. Maria moved through the house, keeping everything running, while Isabella existed in a kind of suspended animation, waiting for something to happen that would tell her whether the choice she'd made was brave or catastrophic. 2 weeks after Roman's arrest, Pierce called with news. The prosecution is offering a deal, he said. 20 years, eligible for parole after 12. Roman testifies against other members of the organization, provides information about financial operations, and admits guilt to trafficking charges. Isabella's stomach turned. And if he doesn't take it? Then we go to trial. And if we lose, he's looking at life without parole. What does Roman want to do? He wants to talk to you first. The federal detention center was exactly as depressing as Isabella expected. Concrete and steel and guards who looked at her like she was already a criminal by association. They searched her, took her phone, led her through corridors that smelled like industrial cleaner and desperation. The visiting room was divided by plexiglass with phones on either side for communication. Isabella sat in the uncomfortable plastic chair and waited while her heart hammered against her ribs. Then Roman appeared on the other side of the glass. He looked thinner, tired. The orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. His hair had grown longer and was pushed back from his face in a way that made him look younger and more vulnerable than she'd ever seen him. He picked up the phone. Isabella picked up hers. "Hi," he said. His voice sounded rough from disuse. "Hi," she echoed. They stared at each other through the plexiglass for a long moment. "You came," Roman said finally. "Of course I came. I thought maybe you'd—" He stopped, started again. "Mitchell told me he offered you immunity. Multiple times. Said you refused every offer." "I did." "Why?" Isabella pressed her palm against the plexiglass. "Because I made a choice. I'm standing by it." Roman's hand came up to mirror hers, separated by plastic and regulations and the entire weight of the federal government between them. "Pierce says they're offering a deal. 20 years. Parole after 12. What do you want to do?" "I want to know if you'll wait 12 years for a man you met 2 weeks ago." The question landed like a physical blow. Isabella's throat felt tight. "Is that what you want? For me to wait?" "I want you to have a life. A real life. Not one spent visiting me in prison and pretending we have a future when I'll be 50 by the time I get out." Roman's voice cracked. "The contract was for 12 months. You've already given more than that was worth. I'm releasing you from it. The marriage can be annulled. You can walk away clean." What if I don't want to walk away? Then you're a fool. Probably. Isabella's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. But I'm your fool, for whatever that's worth. Roman closed his eyes. When he opened them again, they were wet. I'm taking the deal. 20 years. I'll serve 12 with good behavior. By the time I get out, you'll be 38. Still young enough to have the life you deserve. And what about the life I want? What life is that? One where I don't spend the next 12 years wondering what would have happened if we'd had more time. If this thing between us was real or just desperation recognizing itself in someone else. Isabella's palm pressed harder against the plexiglass. Take the deal. Serve your time. But don't tell me to walk away. Let me decide for myself what I'm willing to wait for. Isabella, I spent my entire life drowning alone. You pulled me out of that water. Maybe we're both still sinking, but at least we're sinking together. That has to count for something. Roman's laugh was broken and beautiful. You're going to wait 12 years for me? I'm going to live my life, build something real. Figure out who I am when I'm not desperate and terrified. And in 12 years, when you walk out of whatever prison they send you to, I'll be there. Then we'll figure out if what we have is real or just two people who found each other at the worst possible moment. What if it's not real? Then at least we'll know. The guard called time. 5 minutes. That's all they got. I'm sorry, Roman said, for the contract, for dragging you into this, for... Don't. Isabella cut him off. Don't apologize for giving me something to hold on to when I had nothing, even if it was messy and complicated and built on desperation. It was real enough when it mattered. The guard appeared behind Roman, indicating time was up. Roman stood slowly, the phone still pressed against his ear. I love you, he said. I don't know when it happened. Probably somewhere between you signing that contract and deleting the FBI's number. But I do. And you deserve to know that before I disappear for 12 years. Isabella's tears finally fell. I love you too, which is either the best or worst thing that's ever happened to me. Definitely worst, Roman said, but he was smiling. That rare smile that made him look human instead of dangerous. Then the guard took him away, and Isabella sat alone in the visiting room with a phone pressed against her ear, connected to nothing, and tears streaming down her face that felt like grief and relief and hope all tangled together. 3 weeks later, Roman stood in front of a judge and pleaded guilty to money laundering and conspiracy in exchange for 20 years and the dropping of trafficking charges that were based on falsified evidence. The judge accepted the plea. The courtroom erupted with reporters rushing to file stories, and Isabella sat in the front row beside Vittorio and watched the man she'd accidentally married get sentenced to 2 decades in federal prison. Afterward, Vittorio took her back to the mansion that was now legally hers as Roman's wife. What will you do? The old man asked. Live, Isabella said. Figure out what that means. Go back to school, maybe. Start the translation business I always wanted. Become someone worth waiting for. Vittorio nodded. And in 12 years? In 12 years, we'll see if what we built in 2 weeks can survive 12 years apart. That's a long time. It's a prison sentence, not a death sentence. Isabella met his eyes. Roman's not the only one who knows how to survive. Vittorio smiled, that sad smile that held decades of watching people make terrible choices for reasons that made sense at the time. You'll be good for him. When he gets out, you'll remind him he's human. That's a lot of pressure to put on someone you barely know. I know enough. You're still here. That tells me everything. Vittorio left, and Isabella stood alone in the mansion that used to feel like a cage, but now just felt like a house. She walked through Roman's study, touching books he'd touched and papers he'd signed, sat in his chair behind his desk. Tried to imagine 12 years of this, visiting hours and phone calls and building a life around the empty space where he should have been. It should have terrified her. Instead, it felt like possibility. Like maybe she could take the stability he'd given her and build something real. Something that wasn't just survival, but actually living. And in 12 years, when Roman walked out of prison, she could meet him as an equal instead of someone he'd saved from drowning. That night, Isabella slept in Roman's bed for the first time. It smelled like his cologne and felt too big and cold without him. But she stayed there anyway, wrapped in his blankets, letting herself grieve the future they should have had while accepting the one they'd been given. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. She almost ignored it. Then she checked anyway. I'm proud of you. Roman. Isabella smiled through tears and typed back, Don't make me wait 13 years. I'm not that patient. 12 years? I promise. I'm holding you to that. I know you will. That's why I love you. Isabella set down her phone and stared at the ceiling of Roman's bedroom, her bedroom now, and let herself imagine 12 years from now, both of them older, changed by time and distance and everything they'd survived apart, meeting outside a prison gate and trying to figure out if the connection forged in desperation could survive in freedom. It was terrifying. It was hope. It was the most human thing she'd felt in years. Somewhere across the city, Roman lay in a cell and thought about the woman who'd walked into his building desperate enough to sign anything and walked out of a courtroom promising to wait 12 years for him. And both of them understood something that couldn't be taught or bought or forced through contracts. Love wasn't salvation. It was choosing to drown together instead of alone. And sometimes that was enough to keep you breathing until the water finally receded and you could stand on solid ground again. Years passed. Isabella built the translation business, traveled, learned who she was when she wasn't desperate or trapped, visited Roman every month like clockwork, watched him age behind plexiglass, and loved him more for the way he asked about her life instead of dwelling on his own. Vittorio died 3 years into Roman's sentence, left the entire Moretti empire to Isabella with instructions to legitimize it, turn it into something Elena would have been proud of instead of something that killed her. Isabella did. Slowly. Carefully, converting warehouses into community centers, redirecting money into legal investments, building something clean from foundations soaked in blood. By year 8, she barely recognized the woman who'd signed that contract in a glass tower while rain hammered the windows. By year 10, she'd published a book about surviving desperation and choosing love anyway. By year 12, she stood outside federal prison at dawn, watching the gates open while her heart hammered against her ribs. Roman walked out wearing jeans and a shirt that fit wrong because he'd lost weight and gained muscle in the wrong places. His hair was longer, gray at the temples now, lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He saw her and stopped walking. They stared at each other across the parking lot the way they'd stared through plexiglass and across conference tables and in the back of FBI cars. Then Roman crossed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms with the desperation of someone who'd been drowning for 12 years and finally breached the surface. "Hi," he said against her hair. "Hi," she whispered back. "You waited." "I promised I would." "I didn't think you actually would." Isabella pulled back enough to look at him. At this man who'd bought her with a contract and loved her through plexiglass, and somehow become the most important person in her life without either of them planning it. "I love you," she said. Still, after everything. Roman's hand came up to cup her face, that gesture that used to feel like possession, but now just felt like coming home. "I love you too, and I have no idea what happens next. We figure it out. Together. No contracts this time? No contracts. Just us. Making choices that actually belong to us." Roman kissed her like a man starving for something he thought he'd never taste again, like someone who'd survived 12 years in prison by holding on to the memory of a woman who'd deleted the FBI's number and chosen him instead. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Isabella took his hand and led him toward the car where Marcus waited with the engine running. "Where are we going?" Roman asked. "Home. The house in Manhattan. It's different now. Maria still runs everything. But it's ours. Actually ours. Built on something other than fear and desperation. And after that? After that, we have the rest of our lives to figure out if what we built in 2 weeks and held on to for 12 years can actually work in the real world. And if it doesn't," Isabella squeezed his hand, "then at least we tried. At least we chose each other when we had options. That has to count for something." They drove into Manhattan together while the sun rose over the city that had watched them drown and somehow kept them breathing anyway. The house was waiting, their lives stretched ahead, and neither of them knew if love built on desperation could survive in freedom. But they were going to find out, together. The way people did when they'd already survived the drowning and were ready to learn how to swim.